If a woman reaches out, most men freeze at the same crossroads. Ego whispers one thing, fear whispers another. And half-baked advice from the internet screams, ignore her, silence makes you powerful. But power without intelligence is just insecurity wearing a mask. So before you decide whether to keep ignoring her, you need to understand why she reached out, what silence actually communicates, and who you become by choosing either response. Let's get one thing clear right from the start. Not every message is interest, and not every silence is strength. Some men ignore because they think it creates desire, others ignore because they're scared to respond wrong, and many ignore because they don't know how to lead a conversation without losing control of their emotions. Silence in itself is not confidence. Silence is only confidence when it is intentional, calm, and detached, not when it is reactive, anxious, or ego-driven. When a woman reaches out, she has already crossed a psychological barrier. Women are not wired to chase the same way men are. For her to initiate, even subtly, it means something shifted internally: curiosity, comfort, emotional safety, or sometimes uncertainty. And uncertainty is important because many men misread it as desire. She might not be saying, I want you. She might be saying, I'm checking where you stand in my world. Now here's where men make the first big mistake. They assume every reach out is a test of power. It's not. Sometimes it's a test of emotional intelligence. She's observing how you respond under low pressure. Are you calm? Are you reactive? Are you bitter? Are you trying to punish her with silence? Or are you grounded enough to respond without over-investing? Ignoring her completely sends a message whether you like it or not. And that message depends on why you're ignoring her. If you ignore because you're trying to look busy, it often comes across as forced. If you ignore because you're hurt and trying to regain control, it comes across as passive-aggressive. If you ignore because you genuinely don't care anymore, it comes across as indifference. Three very different energies, same action, completely different outcomes. The problem is, most men ignore from the second category, hurt disguised as strategy, and women are exceptionally good at sensing emotional residue. They feel when silence is heavy. They feel when it's loaded. They feel when it's performative. And that kind of silence doesn't increase attraction. It lowers respect. So should you keep ignoring her? The real question is, what outcome do you want? And who are you trying to be while achieving it? If she reaches out after disappearing, pulling away, or keeping you as an option, ignoring her might feel like justice. But relationships are not courtrooms, they are mirrors. And whatever behavior you normalize, you invite back. If you train yourself to disappear instead of communicate, you're not becoming strong. You're becoming unavailable in a way that also blocks genuine connection. Strength is not, I can ignore you. Strength is, I can respond without needing anything from you. That's the difference. A man who is centered doesn't rush to reply, but he also doesn't play dead. He responds on his terms, calm, neutral, unreactive, not trying to impress, not trying to punish, just present. Because presence is far more unsettling and attractive than silence ever will be. Now let's talk about context, because ignoring blindly is lazy advice. If a woman reaches out with breadcrumbs, random emojis, late night hey, vague check-ins with no substance, then yes, over-engaging is a mistake, but ignoring completely is not the only alternative. You can acknowledge without investing. You can respond without chasing. You can set a tone that says, I'm open, but I'm not available for confusion. On the other hand, if she reaches out with clarity, asking how you are, referencing something meaningful, showing consistency, then ignoring her doesn't make you high value. It makes you emotionally illiterate. High value men don't avoid connection, they filter it. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Many men ignore women because they are afraid that if they respond, they'll fall back into overgiving. That's not a silence problem, that's a boundary problem. And using silence to compensate for weak boundaries is like using painkillers for a broken bone. Temporary relief, long-term damage. You don't need to ignore her to maintain power. You need to regulate yourself. Ask yourself honestly, if you respond, will you spiral? Will you overthink every word? Will you wait anxiously for her reply? If yes, then silence might be necessary, not as strategy, but as self-control, not to manipulate her, but to stabilize yourself. That kind of silence is not about her at all. It's about you stepping back until you can engage without losing your center. But once you are centered, ignoring becomes unnecessary. Women don't fall for men who vanish. They feel drawn to men who are emotionally steady, men who don't change their rhythm based on attention, men who don't need to withdraw to feel powerful, men who can engage lightly, lead calmly, and walk away cleanly if the energy isn't right. Another mistake men make is assuming that responding equals availability. It doesn't. Availability is emotional overexposure, oversharing, over-explaining, overreacting. A composed response is not availability, it's leadership, and leadership is attractive. If she reaches out and you respond grounded, you gain information. You observe her consistency, her tone, her effort. Ignoring her gives you nothing except temporary ego relief. Responding intelligently gives you data, and men who make good decisions don't operate without data. There is also a deeper layer here that most men never address. Some men ignore because they want to be wanted. They want her to double text, chase, prove. But the need to be chased is still neediness, just dressed differently. Real confidence doesn't require proof. It observes behavior and decides quietly. If she reaches out once and disappears again, you have your answer. If she reaches out and builds something consistent, you have your answer. Either way, you didn't have to disappear to find out. So no, the question is not, should you keep ignoring her? The real question is, can you respond without losing yourself? If yes, respond. If no, pause. Fix your center first. Because the goal is not to win a power game. The goal is to become the kind of man for whom games are unnecessary. And once you become that man, whether you respond or stay silent won't be driven by fear, ego, or strategy. It will be driven by clarity. And clarity changes everything. When you operate from clarity, you stop asking, what will this do to her? And start asking, what does this say about me? Because at the end of the day, your responses are not shaping her behavior as much as they are shaping your own standards. A lot of men underestimate how much women observe consistency. Not consistency in texting every day, but consistency in emotional temperature. If you are warm one day, cold the next, silent the third, you don't look mysterious. You look unstable. And instability, no matter how confidently packaged, creates anxiety, not attraction. When she reaches out, she's not just testing interest. She's reading emotional safety. She's unconsciously asking, if I engage with him, will it be calm or chaotic? Men who rely on ignoring often don't realize they're signaling unpredictability. One day you exist, the next day you vanish. That doesn't communicate strength. It communicates avoidance. And avoidance always comes from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control. Here's something most men don't want to admit. Ignoring feels powerful because it removes risk. No reply means no rejection. No engagement means no emotional exposure. But growth never happens in places where risk is eliminated. It happens where control over self is stronger than fear of outcome. If you can only feel powerful when you're silent, your power is conditional. Real power stays intact whether you speak or not. Now let's flip the perspective for a moment. Imagine a man who receives a message and doesn't rush, doesn't panic, doesn't disappear. He replies when it fits his life with a tone that's relaxed, grounded, and unbothered. No emotional spikes, no hidden agenda. That kind of response creates contrast. It says, I'm not waiting, but I'm not running either. And that balance is rare. Women feel safe around men who don't need silence to regulate their emotions. Another layer men often miss is timing. Immediate replies aren't the problem. Delayed replies aren't the solution. Emotional urgency is the issue. You can reply in 5 minutes without urgency, and you can reply in 5 days with desperation. Time means nothing without emotional control. So when she reaches out, the question isn't, how long should I wait? It's, am I replying from abundance or from lack? Because she will feel the difference even if she can't articulate it. Men who ignore too often also forget something crucial. Attraction grows through shared emotional experiences, not through absence alone. Silence can create curiosity, yes, but curiosity without warmth eventually turns into distance. And distance, once normalized, is very hard to reverse. If you want momentum, you need engagement, controlled engagement, purposeful engagement, not emotional dumping, not chasing, but presence. There's also a harsh truth here that needs to be said. Sometimes a woman reaches out not because she wants you, but because she wants validation. Ignoring her might protect you from being used, but responding with boundaries does the same thing while keeping your dignity intact. You don't need to vanish to avoid being an option. You need to stop acting like one. Options over-explain. Options reply instantly with enthusiasm. Options keep conversations alive single-handedly. Men with standards don't do any of that. They respond, but they don't perform. And if she senses that you're not trying to win her approval, the dynamic shifts. Now she's the one adjusting, not because you ignored her, but because you didn't hand her emotional control. Silence is only attractive when it comes from fullness, not from withholding. Another point men rarely consider: ignoring someone trains you to suppress instead of express. Over time, this spills into every area of your life. You stop addressing issues directly, you start retreating instead of leading, and eventually you confuse emotional avoidance with maturity. Maturity is not emotional disappearance. Maturity is emotional responsibility. If something doesn't work for you, you don't disappear, you disengage consciously. There's a difference. Disappearing is reactive. Disengaging is intentional. When a woman reaches out and you decide not to continue, the strongest position is not silence, it's calm closure. Even if that closure is subtle, even if it's just reduced availability without hostility, that communicates self-respect far more clearly than vanishing ever will. And here's where many men get uncomfortable. Responding doesn't obligate you to anything. You're not signing a contract by replying. You're not reopening a chapter unless you choose to. But men who fear replying often secretly believe that once they engage, they'll lose control. That belief alone tells you where the real weakness is. Control is not about cutting communication. Control is about controlling your reaction. If you can talk to her without needing her validation, without trying to impress, without reopening old wounds, then there is no reason to ignore her. And if you can't do that yet, the work isn't in perfecting silence, it's in strengthening yourself. Because eventually, silence stops working, people move on, energy goes where it's welcomed, not where it's manipulated. And when that happens, men who relied on ignoring are left confused, wondering why the same tactic that once got attention now gets nothing at all. That's because attraction evolves. What once sparked curiosity later requires depth, and depth can't exist without presence. So let this be the part you actually remember. If a woman reaches out, your response is not about her. It's a reflection of who you have become. Weak men ask, will this make her want me? Strong men ask, Does this align with my standards? That shift alone changes everything. Ignoring her is easy. Any man can disappear. Any man can go silent and call it strategy. But very few men can stay emotionally steady, respond with composure, and remain detached from outcome. That's why silence is common and presence is rare. Do not confuse emotional withdrawal with self-respect. Self-respect doesn't hide. It doesn't punish. It doesn't sulk in silence hoping to be missed. Self-respect stands calmly, speaks clearly, and walks away cleanly when necessary. If you ignore her because you're hurt, you're still controlled by her. If you ignore her to manipulate, you're still seeking validation. If you ignore her out of fear, you're still avoiding growth. None of those are power. Power is being able to engage without attachment. Power is being able to disengage without resentment. Power is knowing that whether she stays or leaves, you remain the same man. A woman reaching out is not a threat, it's information. And men who are confident don't run from information, they evaluate it. They observe behavior, they watch consistency, they respond without emotional spikes, and then they decide. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to teach lessons. You don't need to win games. Games exist only where there is insecurity. The man who is truly grounded doesn't need to ask whether to ignore or respond. He already knows, because his decisions don't come from ego, loneliness, or fear of losing control. They come from clarity. And clarity is dangerous in the best way, because when you act from clarity, you stop reacting. When you stop reacting, you stop being predictable. And when you stop being predictable, people feel your presence without you forcing it. So the next time she reaches out, don't ask, what should I do to keep my power? Ask, what would a calm, self-respecting man do here? Then do exactly that, not to impress her, not to punish her, but to honor yourself. That's where real strength lives.